I just finished reading the book Dune by Frank Herbert. Um, like basically in a nutshell, it's about like two different families that are like in a war basically over a really important desert planet. And I mean, there's a lot more to it. Like the main character is kind of like a Jesus or kind of like a Mahdi type of figure. Like by the end of the first book, he becomes like the emperor of like the entire known universe. And like the planet, it's like they have these giant sandworms, which are like, um, I mean, as you might imagine, they're like worms that are just like enormous, like the size of an aircraft carrier or something, and they kind of like swim around like beneath the sand. So like anyway, like my first question, like are you aware of any desert planets that have giant sandworms, kind of like the ones in Dune?
Not necessarily the same way, as I can only read the possibility of your mind to some degree of what you're referring to. Of course, there are planets that have sandworms that are bigger than what you might deem a worm on Earth. If they act the same way or have the same function or behavior as in your theoretical scenarios and have a story, but there are indeed worlds that are barren with a lot of dune landscape, if you will, to use that word, where there are indeed worms that inhabit larger caverns. They're not highly intelligent, but not as stupid perhaps, or low vibrational or whatever term you like to use in your world. And that's not insulting, I hope, of your third dimensional or second dimensional animal creature of the same or similar nature that have a somewhat of a hive mind.
Okay. Do you know if the planet Mars has any sandworms?
Smaller ones, likely. It definitely had in your what you consider ancient past. Also, most planets that have a similar barren landscape have some form of inhabitants in your sand, whether worms or insects or similar critters.
Okay, cool. Well, like the reason I mentioned Mars is like, you know, the
Yes.
the planet in Dune, it's called Arrakis, and it reminds me a lot of Mars. I mean, it's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
they're both desert planets, obviously, but like the book, like later on in the book, we learned that like a certain group of like locals on the planet have been trying to terraform the planet by like planting grasses and bushes and cactuses and like in secret and preventing satellites from passing over the area. And like whenever I was reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what KALASK was talking about a few years ago with Mars. Like how there are trees and bushes and stuff on Mars, but it's being kept secret from the general public. Um, anyway, and by the way, like in later books, like I haven't read the later books yet, but I know like by book four, like the desert planet is basically turned into like a big forest planet. But anyway, like, can you share like what you know about how the terraforming of Mars started? Like, who started it first of all, and when?
Depends what you consider terraforming, as this refers more to your Earth's practices. However, the idea being the planet was made inhabitable by different species, once being reptiles that made the planet their own. There were insectoids that also made the planet their own. They formed it to be inhabitable to their own species in what you might deem time frames of a million years. However, remember, time is very malleable. It goes back and forth. After that, there was a lot of conflict. You're aware of the destruction of Malde, where mass also played a certain role, and it was severely damaged. And then afterwards, there were other more mammalian creatures. We certainly paid a visit at this point, when we also had a colony on Earth, or a basis there. So where we operated from Mars, not our planets in your inhabitable solar system. Eventually, humanoid beings that are not too dissimilar for your kind settled there and established their own bases. There was also conflict over resources there. There was conflict with other species of a reptilian nature that had made their home there, and that all led eventually to the evacuation and likely turning the planet then to a more deserted region due to conflict. And that then eventually led to the situation where your own species from your planet is now deeming it suitable for re-exploration and rehabilitation in a perhaps near future, albeit they have already established some more of a presence there than is consciously publicly shared.
Okay. So like the forests that exist on Mars now, like were they like did they always exist? I mean, like whenever there was the nuclear war on Mars and like the destruction of Maldek, like did those forests like did they survive like the entire destruction, or did Mars go through like a state where the entire planet was desert for a long period of time, and then like somebody later terraformed it to grow those forests?
Slightly both, but mostly has been reformed. As at some point it was an almost entire destruction. It's also some parts remained like ruins, biologically speaking, and then out of those, some remains still developed into something greater, you might deem a forest.
Okay, so do you know do you have any information on like who most recently was in charge of the terraforming? Like is it like the reptilians and the insectoids that live there now, or like or who?
Possibly also humans that made colonies there. I'm also reading from the consciousness field of that planetary body.
Okay.
And yes, likely. It depends greatly what you deem terraforming. Being habitable for one species or another is quite a different act.
Right. So do you think Mars can ever be turned back into a forest planet or something like on the scale of Earth?
There's indeed possible, not your current Earth technology, but there are species that would be capable of doing so if they so desire.
Is that what they're trying to do though, from what you're aware of?
Possibly, but only a very small scale. I'm not aware of the complete overhaul of the entire planetary body in your current time frame. But remember, time frames are changing.
Okay. Do you know? I mean, like why do they not want to terraform the entire planet back to like a forest, like back to kind of like Earth? I mean, is it just that it's not possible?
It's possible, a huge effort, and depends what species you're referring to and who has the desire to do so and who does not, and the conflict there might be.
Okay. Um, and like in the book Dune, it talks about like there's like a lot of water on the planet, basically, like more than anybody ever thought possible. And but it's like in the atmosphere, like water vapor in the atmosphere, and like they just need to condense it into like precipitation in order to be able to use it and to grow plants and stuff like that. Do you know like how much water is available on Mars in terms of like in comparison to the water on Earth? Like does Mars, including all the water moisture like in the atmosphere, is it like half as much as Earth, or what?
Depending on the time frame. At some point it was not as watery as Earth, but perhaps the opposite way around, approximately.
What do you mean the opposite way around?
With water and land distribution to Earth.
You mean like you mean there was more land on Mars than there was water?
Yes, comparable to your Earth, except the other way around, in terms of the cover of the surface.
Okay. But like, do you know how much water exists on Mars now? Like, is there even enough water to be able to like turn the entire planet back into like a forest or a jungle planet?
Hmm. It could be, if likely would have to be brought more water there, or the melting of some ice regions, etc. It's possible.
Okay, yeah, I was about to. That was going to be my next question. Like, would it be possible for people to bring water to Mars, like from like the Kuiper Belt or from comets or something like that?
Yeah, sure. Depends what technology they're using.
Okay,
Water can be transported.
okay. Um, okay. Now, like another question. Like there's a quote about fear that gets repeated a lot in the book. And like it's one that's like really stuck with me. It's been like really helpful to me like for the last couple months or so. Hang on, let me turn to the page. Like I want to read it to you and like get your thoughts on it. So okay, here it goes. Well, first of all, it's kind of like there's like this secret group called the Bene Gesserit, and it reminds me kind of like of the so-called Illuminati group or whatever you want to call them on Earth, kind of like a secret society. And like they have a quote that they like repeat amongst themselves called the Litany Against Fear. And so anyway, here's the quote: "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." So anyway, like, what are your thoughts about that quote? I mean, I know like you've talked a lot about fear, you and KALASK. Like, does that sound? I don't know. Does that resonate with you? And like, can you talk about the importance of facing our fear in general?
It does resonate to some degree, and the idea is, of course, what you referred earlier to was your problems and difficult times. That is always the result of giving in to fear, not what you are aware of courage, overcoming fear, not the way of ignoring it, but going not where you don't want to go, where you think is bad or wrong, like hurting yourself intentionally, but facing what you deeply want to do. And if fear crops up in the meantime, it always comes from the ego, unlike love that comes from your higher self or your soul that knows your life path much better. So therefore, if you don't overcome your fear, you learn the lesson. And that is indeed how you make all your learning lessons. That is ultimately the only learning lesson at all, is to connect to love. And it takes the courage, idea, to overcome fear when it enters your consciousness.
Okay. So like, let's say somebody were like being abducted by aliens and like, they just, or maybe that's not the best example. Like, let's say, I don't know, like they were in some bad situation where somebody like really meant them harm, but like they just like convinced themselves like, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. And like, they just didn't allow fear to enter them at all. Like, is it possible that like no harm could possibly come to them?
No. It's likely a method the reptiles would employ, or not entering, but embracing it and going full into it. The human species is more likely in the avoidance. But anyway, again, if the fear is just pushed down, it will eventually still manifest. You cannot completely annihilate it.
Okay. So like, how do you feel about fear? Like, do you just not ever fear anything ever?
Sometimes there's an unease. It depends on what level of fear you have. We don't have fear in the world that you do. However, I'm aware that David is capable of feeling fear, being incarnated in a human format. So it also depends what current experience you're having. And in our species, we would not go down to those depths of darkness that you didn't fear, but we are much aware of them from our history. So if you're talking to my current self in the current timeline, whenever there's fear, I employ the courage method and reconnect with love, and that's how I learn my lessons as well. There can be no courage if there's no fear at all. But I'm perhaps more aware of the lesson, and therefore I don't need to dwell on it.
Okay.
Comparatively, but I'm still in the physical incarnation, therefore still make learning lessons like everyone else.
Okay. Now, like, before this session, like, I sent David a brief video clip of an interview with the author of Dune, Frank Herbert. Like, are you able to, I don't know, like, watch that video and like, use it to connect to, the oversoul of Frank Herbert?
I've connected to the consciousness. It's available, yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, like, with, as we were just talking about with Steve Irwin, like, I don't know how much, you're able to like read or get him to answer or whatever, but like the first question that, I would like you to ask him, if you don't mind, it's similar again to Steve, like the first question that I asked you to ask Steve Irwin, like basically why did he choose to die relatively young, like before he had even finished the last book in the Dune series?
Would likely have gone on to a degree that he was not be satisfied with it and he had to abbreviate it at some point. Akin to probably David's current predicament with our book situation, except in this case the individual decided to abbreviate it prematurely through death rather than discomfort, as there was nothing else more importantly to be done, and in order for it not to drag on.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like when you gave that answer, like I remembered like suddenly an interview with another author that I'm a big fan of, George R. Martin, who was a friend of Frank Herbert somewhat, and like he said that like shortly before Frank Herbert died, he told him that he like started to kind of hate the Dune books because like he had written 6 books already, and like every time a new book would come out, his fans would say like, oh, that's great, now give us another book, and then he would write another one, and his fans would say, oh, that's great, now give us another Dune book, and he would write another one, they would say, that's great, now give us another Dune book, and he got to where like he was just tired of having to write more and more and more. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. He was just tired of writing more. Like even if he had written a 7th one, fans would be like, well, that's great, now give us an 8th one. So, okay, yeah, that answers that. That makes sense to me. um, Now, like, I guess like another question though, like about a decade or so after Frank Herbert died, his son, he said that like he found hundreds of pages of notes that his dad had written detailing like how like what he planned to happen in the 7th, and like what he intended to be the final Dune book. And his son and another author, they later wrote 2 books, like officially ending the Dune series, which they claim are based on Frank Herbert's notes. But like personally, I haven't read those books. I've only read the first Dune book so far. But like from like reading the opinions of other fans like on internet forums and stuff, like almost 100% of the fans, like they think that either his son and this other author, like they're just making it up, like when they claim that the books were based on notes left behind by Frank Herbert, or like Frank Herbert only left like a few very like brief notes, and like they made like 99% of it up themselves, because like the books are so, like in their opinion, the books are so like out of line with like the direction that the Dune series was going. So anyway, like can you ask Frank Herbert if he did indeed leave behind like hundreds of pages of notes detailing like in great detail how he planned for the 7th book in the series to go?
Not necessarily in detail, but quite a bit. And from what I'm aware of, yes, there were, and again, it would have likely been more and more and more if he had stayed longer, but not to a degree that it would have ever come to a conclusion the way it could have if he had not left.
What do you mean like it wouldn't have come to a conclusion if? What do you mean by that?
Would have likely had more ideas on top of the ideas and then developed the storyline further, and perhaps the soul was getting tired of it, or what was most important was being shared. The ego also got in the way. Again, I'm also just reading here what I can find and I draw my own conclusions. The only thing I can say clearly is that there was indeed more material. Depends what you consider detailed.
Okay. Now like this again, this might be like really this might be like really hard for you to translate from him in detail, but I mean like can you ask him like how he intended for the 7th book in the series to go, basically, like roughly?
I can't read it exactly from his conscious mind.
Okay. Uh, well, like I know, like before he died, he had given like an interview with somebody where he said that like he planned for like the first 6 Dune books, like everything is all about like imperialism and like dictatorship, and he said like in this interview that he planned for like the 7th and final book to, like he planned for the universe to become more democratic. Like, can you ask him if he could expand on that at all? Like, how did he plan on the universe becoming democratic?
Likely he did not come up with a conclusion how that was supposed to come together in conjunction with his other writings, but that's just the conclusion that I'm drawing.
Okay.
Like he also has a metaphor of his political position on your own world.
Okay.
The conflict between there being a peaceful negotiation and war as an outlet.
Okay. And like one of the biggest questions that Dune fans have is like, what in the sixth book, the final book that he wrote, it ends kind of on a cliffhanger. Like I've read the final chapter myself, even though I haven't read the whole book, but it ends like with these two characters called Marty and Daniel, and like it's kind of implied that like they're these very very powerful beings, like perhaps like the most powerful beings that have ever existed. And like to me it seems pretty clearly stated that the characters are like what are called face dancers, which is like basically like they're shapeshifters. They can, like they were created by some other organization, but they're able to like change how they look, and that helps them like in terms of like political assassinations or stuff like that. But like somehow like these two people, like they escaped control of the group that created them. Um, but like it's left on a cliffhanger, like exactly who they are. And in the two books that were written by Frank Herbert's son and this other writer, like it goes in a totally opposite direction where it says like, no, they weren't face dancers at all. They were just artificial intelligence beings, which like fans of the book, like they hate that explanation. They're like, no, this is not what Frank Herbert intended at all. They didn't get this from his notes. They just made this totally up themselves. But anyway, like, can you, like, if it's possible, can you ask Frank Herbert, like, who the heck Marty and Daniel were and, like, who he intended for them to be?
Like a sibling relationship of some sort.
Can you elaborate? Like,
Perhaps similar. I'm looking and reading to the Romulus and Remus idea.
okay, you mean like they were kind of like brother and sister themselves?
Yes.
Okay, but like,
Also in the foundation part.
what do you mean? What about the Foundation?
Founding fathers of something. Of some form of civilizational experience.
I mean, can you elaborate on that? Like, what were they trying to like create a new civilization?
Yes, but with different intentions. I'm reading while I'm sharing. With different intentions for different outcomes for civilization. There's a topic perhaps more similar in some of your world history. At least that's what I'm getting now, if that was his conscious intention at that point, but now it is.
Okay. So can you ask him like if he did intend Marty and Daniel to be like just some artificial intelligence beings, or were they like what I think from having read parts of the final book, like were they what are called face dancers, like the shapeshifter type beings who kind of broke off from the group that created them?
Yes, I did bring off. Simple.
Okay, so but like in terms of like were they artificial intelligence beings?
Somewhat, you would might deem them biological robots.
Okay. Um, okay, no, like another question. Like after uh after Frank Herbert died, like one of his author friends wrote in a book that like Frank Herbert had told him that he often ate hallucinogenic mushrooms, which like I assume probably helped him. Like, I figure like he probably did in fact eat hallucinogenic mushrooms because like the book that I read, like the first book, it's very like mind trippy. Like the characters, like they often take a hallucinogenic substance called spice, which like causes them to like go on mind trips where like I don't know, like they see like the entire universe and like time stops and they're able to see like visions of the future and stuff like that. Um, but anyway, like can you ask him if he did in fact really eat hallucinogenic mushrooms?
Yes, he did at some point. I'm aware if it consumed them regularly, but he had at least one experience.
Okay. Um. Well, like while we're on the topic, can you ask him if he smoked marijuana?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
It
Um.
might have been also on an occasion, but not the next regular consumption.
Okay. Um. So like there's a lot of quotes in the book that I would like to ask you about. I mean, if we had like 5 hours, I would ask you about a bunch of different quotes, but like one that really resonates with me like almost more than any other one. It's like kind of like just a short little quote where like a woman like her husband is killed by the main character and then like she wants she wants to be like the new wife of this character and but like another character is telling her like no, you're too old, there's no reason for you to be his wife, and she's like no, I want to be his wife, and he's like silence woman, and he says if a thing has merit it'll be, and like that really resonated with me because it seems like oftentimes like things that I don't really have much desire for, like they happen, and then like I realized later that like they happened because they had merit, like it made sense, and then like some things that I really want to happen, like they don't happen, and then later I realize like, well, there was no point in that happening, it didn't have merit, so it didn't happen. But anyway, like what do you think about this quote? If a thing has merit, it'll be. Like, what do you think about that?
Everything happens for a reason. It's just not a way to put it.
Okay.
Everything that's supposed to manifest will manifest in one way or the other. You can nothing do about that. You can't decide how it manifests. Indeed, if something is supposed to manifest, it will in one way or the other, always.
Okay. So like who decides whether a thing has merit? Like is it our own subconscious or the source or what?
Goes in conjunction, your own oversoul is in cooperation with what you might deem God or the source to create your life experiences, and all your life experiences are eventually taking shape.
Okay. Uh, well, like one final quote that I want to ask your thoughts on. The quote is by like a really powerful kind of tyrant of the planet. Like in one of the later books, Leto the Second, the God Emperor of Dune. But anyway, like the quote is, "Time does not count itself. You have only to look at a circle, and this is apparent." And like this, like it was in one of the later books that I saw, like when I was just skimming through it. But like it really stuck with me because like a few years ago, I was listening to an interview with like somebody was interviewing Zeta Gray through David, and like they were talking about time, and the Zeta Gray said something like, "You see a line, we see a circle." Basically saying that time is a circle, not a line. So like, do you agree with that? That time is more like a circle rather than a line? And like, if so, can you clarify for people like me who have a hard time understanding time, like basically like the nature of time and how it's more of a circle rather than a line?
I can perhaps help you by confusing you a little bit more. The idea is more of a spiral, so it is both a line like a circle. In a way, time does not go linear from one point to another, but it is also not necessarily just going round and round. It's all the experiences like Groundhog Day, as I'm referring to a movie of yours in your world. More the idea that you're going through different circles on a spiral, and repetitions occur in your personal history or in global history, etc., 100% depending on your current state of consciousness, which is also related to whatever issues you have or any positive experiences. You can call it karma if you wish, that repeat and eventually result from a previous experience that you had in another one that's related to it, but not quite the same, but a new version of the same thing. And also from that perspective, you could say that while you are beyond time, in a higher dimension, you can access all of those different time points that are basically around you, if you want to call them a circle, simultaneously. While from a linear perspective, you would only have one moment in which you can experience your life, and then afterwards it's gone, and another one is started. You have no more access to it. Well, it is indeed that you have not just access to it, but you're creating a new version of it in any moment of you're currently experiencing, the now moment.
Okay. So I mean, like, obviously we can spend hours talking about the nature of time, but I mean, like, I don't know what exactly to ask you specifically, but like, can you talk like a little bit about like the nature of time? And I mean, I know like there is no time, like you've said that many different times, but anyway, like, I don't know, can you talk a little bit more about like the general nature of time so like people on Earth can like, I don't know, try to understand it a little bit better?
Time exists in lower dimensionalities, and you can enter any point that you call a certain experience in your time frame from your now moment once you are in a higher consciousness state. Time is basically an illusion and of a certain experience that you're making intentionally in order to have something like a linear experience in your current life frame, where you have the aging process and you're going through different experiences where you are having learning lessons one after the other, when in reality all of them are happening simultaneously, but in a third dimensional experience that would not be possible to have. Even though once your life might be over, you will all see them simultaneously at once, while you're incarnated. Your subconscious mind might be more aware, or your higher conscious rather, but your ego cannot process that much information because it's a limited function. Therefore, it has to process one at a time. So therefore, since there's no possibility to process them from that perspective at once, you need to go from one step to the next, and therefore you create a linear experience from your ego perspective, while you're only dealing with one thing in one juncture.
Okay. So like for you in the sixth dimension, where time doesn't exist, I mean, is it kind of like you can automatically like shift back to when you're still like a baby, and then like you can, shift to where like you're an old man?
From a higher perspective, yes, you can see them simultaneously, and you can experience them simultaneously.
But what about like from your perspective, like Metax's perspective in the sixth dimension? Can you shift yourself to where like you can, go back to your childhood and have certain experiences then, and then like, immediately go forward to where like you're an old man and, have experiences there, or what?
I could identify as being a cop in that moment I am, and yes, I can do it right now, and I can access the frequency just as much as I can access yours. Or more
Okay.
so, since it's more my identity.
Okay. Um, but like, so like, say like, let's say you were to like go back in your own so-called past and like, um, what I mean, like, is it possible for you to like go back in time and then like, hypothetically, like, let's say kill your mother and father, and then like, I mean, like, would that be possible? And if so, like, how would that affect your current person? Like, would you cease to exist?
I would still be the cop in that experience.
But like, let's say you go back in time, like before your parents, like before you're even born, like, and you kill your parents, like, would that prevent you from ever being born or something?
I do exist before I was even born. However, my parents did die and they did live. All versions are possible. So my parents did get killed and I don't exist in one version. For example, all of those versions exist.
Okay.
I understand the time paradox from your linear understanding, but it's really not a paradox once you understand that all possibilities are simultaneous.
Um, yeah, like, so like if you were to, travel back in time and like kill your parents and then like go back to, um, what? Yeah, it is really hard for me to understand. Like, let's say you were to go back in time and like, change a whole bunch of stuff and then like go back to the present, like where you are now. Like, would everything be totally different?
Of course, it is totally different.
I mean, like, would it be different? Um, yeah, it's hard to put into words like what I'm trying to ask, but like,
I understand what it would be different, and it is different, but it is not the version I'm experiencing currently.
okay, yeah. So like, you would switch to like a different timeline where things are different.
Yes,
Okay. Um.
I am switching to a different timeline at all times,
Okay.
gradually.
Okay. Uh, yeah, it's a really complicated topic. Like maybe at some point I want to spend like 2 hours, talking about this. But I guess like to move on to another question for now. So like the main character, uh, like at least the main character in the first book, Paul, like he develops some like what are called prescient senses, where he's able to kind of like not directly see the future, but like kind of like you and I have talked like we've used the metaphor of like predicting the weather, where it's kind of like you're able to sense how things are going currently, and like you're able to predict like if things go along this path, like what they'll be like in the future. Um, but anyway, like is like is there any way that like me and other people could like develop our prescient abilities and be able to like predict the future better?
The best way to create the future is to create it more consciously. But indeed, it's possible to predict the future more accurately if you're more in tune.
More in tune with what? The future?
With higher frequency, if you will, not the future, but the fourth and fifth dimension where there is no time, where all the futures exist simultaneously.
Okay.
Or just with some entity that can help you with that if you have a difficulty relating to such concepts in an abstract manner.
Okay. But again, is there any like, do you have any specific like recommendations for how people can like, get better at predicting our future in the way that, people might try to predict the weather?
That is indeed possible. Again, depends how you create that experience on its own.
Uh, okay. Um, I mean, like I'm still a little bit confused. Like, um, like for example, like if I or somebody were to like eat mushrooms, hallucinogenic mushrooms, like would that help to like predict the future?
Not necessarily. You might just get confused. You might see possibility of future timelines, but not be able to interpret them correctly.
Okay. Um, all right. Well, like I guess the final question on the Dune topic, for now anyway. Like whenever I read the later books, I might come back to this topic. But like in the first book, there's a like I mentioned the group the Bene Gesserit, which is kind of like a secret society, somewhat like the so-called Illuminati. Um, but like they like in the book, like thousands of years before, like they were on this desert planet, and they created like legends and the like the primitive society that that lived on this planet, and they said like one day a certain being will be born, and he'll be the son of a Bene Gesserit member, and they basically like they created this legend, and like the purpose of creating this legend was like so if in the future like they had some desire to like um to I guess like to exert their power or like to have more control over over this people, they can say like, oh, this person here, he's the prophet that we predicted thousands of years ago. Now you have to follow him. You have to do what he says. So like the main character of the book, he's kind of like a false prophet. Like it's not like the universe chose him to be this special prophet, this savior figure. It's just kind of like thousands of years ago, this legend was created, and like now, like he and his mother are like taking advantage of this prophecy that was just like created for their own benefit. So anyway, like, do you know if any kind of extraterrestrial civilization ever did such a thing on Earth? Like, purposely created like prophecies of savior type figures so that one day in the future, like they themselves could be like, oh, this is the savior figure. Now you need to do what he says.
Yes, or just of themselves, malintended or benevolent intended differently. Some just wanted to return again, and some just literally told people in the world they would come back one day, or they would send somebody, and that then likely got passed on and passed through religious practices from one religious group to another one, and was changed over and over and over again until your very now moment of where you have certain groups that are waiting now even for extraterrestrial saviors in a similar fashion. Even though it's more accurate to what it originally was, it's not necessarily the religious aspect that have been added to it in the meantime.
Okay. Yeah, like you had, I think when we were talking about the Prophet Muhammad, or I don't know, maybe like when we were talking about Jesus or something, like you said that like either the Muslims or the Jews or somebody are waiting for a Mahdi figure to return. Do you know if like who created this prophecy of the Mahdi figure's return? Was it like some civilization, like some extraterrestrial civilization that intends to use that prophecy for their own benefit or something like that?
The original creation has likely been distorted. Remember, the Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic, Christian traditions and all the offshoots are based on much older prophecies. And many of those have just copied those aspects, and their idea that someday somebody would return is indeed something that's been passed on there as well, and both benevolent and malevolent groups have added their own aspects to it and used it for their own benefit over history. So to some groups, it depends on what way you look at it. One group might have interpreted as benevolent and others as more as malevolent, and other groups just saw somebody as their personal savior.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess that's like the last question that I have on the whole Dune topic for now. Yeah, it's a really interesting series. Like it kind of like freaked me out when I was reading it because it's like every page, it's like there's stuff that like we had talked about ourselves. So anyway, it's an interesting book series.